The air in the house had felt heavier since he moved in. It wasn't just the way his booming voice filled the rooms or the way his presence seemed to linger even when he wasn't home. It was the way he erased things slowly, methodically, as if he were rewriting history itself. Lena sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph she had managed to save. It was creased from being hidden under her mattress, but it was still there. Her father, smiling, his arms wrapped around her on her 10th birthday. Her real father. The man who had been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night story. But now, her stepfather, Greg, was working tirelessly to make sure that man was forgotten. Lena. Greg's voice echoed up the stairs, sharp and commanding. Dinner. She slipped the photo into the pocket of her jeans, smoothing the fabric over it as if it could protect it from Greg's relentless mission to erase her past. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for another evening of forced smiles and awkward conversation. Downstairs, the dining room table was set with an almost aggressive precision, napkins folded into perfect triangles, silverware aligned just so. Greg stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for imperfections. Lena's mother sat to his right, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the empty space in front of her. She looked smaller somehow, as if Greg's presence had somehow shrunk her. There you are, Greg said as Lena entered the room. His tone was light, but there was an edge to it, like a knife wrapped in silk. We were starting to think you'd disappeared. Lena forced a smile and slid into her seat. Sorry. I was just tidying up. Good, Greg said, nodding approvingly. Clutter is a sign of a cluttered mind. We wouldn't want that, would we? Lena's grip tightened on her fork, but she said nothing. Instead, she focused on the plate in front of her, pushing the food around with her utensil. So, Greg continued, his voice taking on a cheerful tone that felt anything but genuine, I was thinking we could redecorate your room this weekend. Give it a fresh start. Maybe get rid of some of those old things that don't really fit anymore. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Things. He meant her father's things. The few remaining traces of him that she had managed to keep hidden. I like my room the way it is, she said softly, her eyes still on her plate. Greg's laugh was sharp, like the crack of a whip. Oh, come on, Lena. You're not a little girl anymore. It's time to move on. Start fresh. Her mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg, maybe we should know, Greg interrupted, his tone firm. It's time. We can't keep living in the past, clinging to things that don't matter anymore. Lena's jaw clenched so tightly she thought her teeth might crack. Don't matter. The photo in her pocket felt like it was burning a hole in her jeans. Her father mattered. His memory mattered. And Greg wasn't going to take that away from her. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the house had fallen silent, Lena crept down the hallway to Greg's study. She had noticed the boxes on the way home from school, dusty cardboard containers stacked in the corner of the garage, labeled in Greg's neat handwriting, junk. She knew what was inside them. The door creaked softly as she pushed it open, and she froze, listening for any sound from upstairs. When none came, she slipped inside and clicked on the small flashlight she had brought with her. The boxes were exactly where she had seen them earlier. She knelt beside them, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the lid off the first one. Inside were more photographs, some framed, others loose, all of her father. There were albums too, filled with snapshots of birthdays, holidays, and lazy Sunday afternoons. Lena's chest tightened as she flipped through them, each image a bittersweet reminder of what she had lost. But beneath the sadness was something else, a quiet determination. Greg could try to erase her father all he wanted, but she wasn't going to let him win. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photo she had been carrying with her all day. She stared at it for a moment, then carefully placed it on top of the others in the box. I'm not going to forget you, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the still room. Not ever. As she closed the box and tucked it back into its corner, a plan began to form in her mind. Greg thought he could rewrite her history, but he had underestimated her. She would wait, patiently, silently, until the right moment. And when that moment came, she would make sure everyone knew the truth. But for now, she needed to be careful. She couldn't let Greg suspect anything. She stood up, brushing the dust off her knees, and turned off the flashlight. As she stepped out of the study and closed the door behind her, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Greg thought he could bury the past, but Lena knew better. The past wasn't something you could erase, not completely. And when the time was right, she would make sure of that. The study was quiet, save for the soft hum of the house settling into the night. Lena hesitated at the doorway, her fingers gripping the edge of the doorframe as she glanced down the dimly lit hallway. Greg's heavy footsteps echoed from the kitchen, the clatter of dishes suggesting he was occupied for the moment. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her with a barely audible click. Her heart pounded as she knelt in front of the stack of boxes she'd discovered earlier. The one labeled miscellaneous caught her eye again, its edges worn and its lid slightly askew. She pulled it toward her, her hands trembling as she lifted it open. The musty scent of old paper filled her nostrils, and she carefully sifted through the contents: faded photographs, a few trinkets, and a small, leather-bound journal. As she flipped through the journal, something caught her attention: a loose page tucked between the pages, its edges yellowed with age. Her breath hitched as she unfolded it, recognizing her father's handwriting immediately. The words were delicate, almost intimate, as if they had been written in a moment of quiet reflection. "Lena, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to tell you these things myself. There's so much I want you to know about me, about your mother, and about the life we shared before you came into the world. I hope this letter finds you when you're ready to hear it." Lena's fingers tightened around the paper, her eyes scanning the lines hungrily. Her father's voice seemed to fill the room, warm and familiar, as if he were sitting right beside her. "I remember the first time I saw your mother. She was sitting alone in a cafe, her hair catching the sunlight like spun gold. I don't know what compelled me to approach her. Maybe it was the way she smiled to herself as she read, or the way her laugh seemed to light up the entire room. But from that moment, I knew she was someone extraordinary." Lena felt a lump forming in her throat. She could almost see the scene playing out in her mind: her father, young and hopeful, drawn to her mother like a moth to a flame. "We fell in love quickly, but it wasn't until one summer night that I truly understood what it meant to love someone completely. It was our first time together, our first moment of true intimacy. The way she looked at me, the way she trusted me, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I wanted to remember everything about that night. The way her skin felt against mine, the sound of her laughter, the way she whispered my name like it was a secret only she knew." Lena's cheeks flushed as she read the words, her heart racing. It wasn't just the openness of her father's confession that surprised her, it was the raw emotion behind it. She had never thought of her parents in that way before, as two people who had shared such a deep, private connection. But now, seeing it laid out in his handwriting, it felt real in a way it never had before. "I want you to know that love isn't something you can control. It's messy and imperfect, but it's also the most beautiful thing in the world. When you find it, when you truly connect with someone, it will change you. It will make you better than you ever thought you could be." Tears pricked at the corners of Lena's eyes as she reached the end of the letter. She folded it carefully, clutching it to her chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. For a moment, she felt a strange mix of emotions: grief for the father she had lost, gratitude for the words he had left behind, and a lingering curiosity about the kind of love he had described. But then she heard it, the creak of a floorboard outside the study door. Her breath caught in her throat as she froze, her eyes darting toward the sound. The doorknob turned slowly, and she quickly shoved the letter back into the box, closing it just as Greg stepped inside. "Lena!" His voice was sharp, his piercing gaze scanning the room until it landed on her. "What are you doing in here?" She stood up quickly, forcing a smile despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. I was just looking for some old notebooks." She gestured vaguely toward the shelves. "I thought they might help with my history project." Greg's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. You know this room is off limits, he said, his tone low and unmistakably threatening. What have you been going through? Lena's mind raced as she tried to keep her expression neutral. Nothing important, she said, shrugging. Just some old stuff. I didn't think it would be a big deal. Greg's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he seemed to relent, stepping back with a sigh. Fine. But next time, ask permission first. And don't make a habit of sneaking around. I won't, Lena promised, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She moved toward the door, eager to escape before he could question her further. But just as she reached the threshold, Greg spoke again, his voice stopping her in her tracks. Lena, he said, his tone softer now but no less unsettling. I know you miss him. But he's gone. And no amount of digging through old boxes is going to bring him back. She turned to face him, her jaw clenched as she met his gaze head-on. I know, she said quietly. But that doesn't mean I have to forget him. Greg didn't respond, but the look in his eyes, a mix of frustration and something else she couldn't quite place, made her skin crawl. She stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her with a shaky exhale. As she made her way back to her room, the letter burned in her mind like a secret she couldn't shake. It wasn't just a memory, it was proof of who her father had been and what he had meant to her mother. And it was something Greg could never take away from her. But as she climbed into bed and stared up at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that Greg knew more than he was letting on. The way he had looked at her in the study, it wasn't just anger or frustration. There was something darker there, something she didn't understand. And that scared her more than anything.